Here I wanted to talk to you about why interlocking and crochet is bad for dreads. First of all, to understand why they are bad for dreads, you gotta understand what they are. So interlocking is when you take a normally healthy dread and force it through the roots. So like a normal dread, a healthy one, the dread is the same thickness here as it is at the roots. But what they do is they take the entire dread and force it through a gap in the roots. So now if you know, like, you're taking, say, let's say, well, let me find thick dread here. Say you're taking a dread this thick and you are making a gap in the roots, which are the same size as the dread, and then forcing it through. You're pushing those roots out first of all, and then you are taking the dread, pushing it through, pulling it out the other side, so that twists the roots on either side of the dread 180 degrees, which makes them extremely tight and puts a lot of tension on them. And then what you do is turn that whole thing and do it again in another direction. So not only are you twisting the roots on either side, you're then twisting them around and back through and around and back through. And what that does is creates a lot of weak points, so that those points are very likely to break. Now, it also takes a normally healthy thick dread and compresses it so that the roots are like 3 times the size of the dread itself. That makes the dread very tight, very weak, and it leaves huge gaps all around it. So you have like big bald areas, and that pulls all the hair in real tight, and that can actually cause a condition where you start losing your hair around the dread and you have permanent bald spots. Another thing about the roots is you need that movement room there at the roots to move and dread, and that's how hair dreads. See, I've never done anything to this in 21 years, and it continually dreads at the roots. But you will always have about this much space, like at the roots, where it's undreaded. You need that. If you're constantly forcing it down tight to the scalp, it'll never dread properly. So you never let it dread. You force it to dread by replacing normal, healthy dreads with a extremely tight, extremely weak dread. Now, a normal head of dreads, like a full head of dreads, should, somebody Googled it, and the dreads should support the weight of somewhere between, I think it was 3 and 8 full-grown elephants. So 30 to 80 tons. Now, interlocking dreads, I mean, you might get lucky, they might survive. African dreads have a much larger chance of them surviving interlocking. It's still a stupid idea, but you might get away with it. But like Caucasian dreads, it's disastrous. You're going to really increase your chances of them breaking. And when they break, they don't support their own weight. Now that's not a good thing with it. Like, one dread should support 500 pounds or more. You should be able to yank on it without hearing any tearing. You shouldn't have any any kind of problems at all with them being strong. Now, like, when you're interlocking, you're just you're screwing yourself basically. And why? Because you get that hair that's real tight, and it some people think it looks neat. Frankly, I think it looks kind of diseased when you have a tiny little thin dread coming out with a big wide area of bald scalp around it. You let salons determine that is what is a neat, tidy, manicured look for you. They're the ones telling you, what your hair should look like. But is it a good look? I don't think it is, really. I don't think anybody, you can convince yourself it's a good look, but it really isn't. Now, crocheting. This is another thing that's become like an epidemic lately. Like, so many people are crocheting their dreads, and what this does is it perforates your dreads. You're constantly, taking, what they do is they take a crochet needle and they sit there and stab, 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 stab. And why I say, I mean, like when you have a dread, you come a little closer here, you get little bits of hair that stick out of the dread. You can't avoid that. They're going to be there. Now, when you're crocheting your dreads, you're trying to pull in all those tiny little hairs, and what you're doing is every time you pull one in, you're breaking dozens or more. So they're going to get fuzzy again in a couple weeks, and then you're going to crochet them again, and you're going to break more hairs, and they're going to get fuzzy, and you're going to crochet and break more. And another thing that crocheting does is it takes a dread that's like this thick, and it forces it to be so tight it's 1/3 this size, and they get stiff. I mean, a dread should be floppy. This is how a dread should flow. It should be able to move. It shouldn't be stiff. It shouldn't hang there like a stick that doesn't move. But that is what crocheting dreads does. It makes them so tight, so stiff, and they get hard. Like, they're super compressed, and they feel like Brillo too. I mean, dreads should be soft and feel good against your skin. They shouldn't feel scratchy. But the scratchy, they should be able to like take a dread and squeeze it, and like compress it, because they're not supposed to be hard. They're supposed to, be firm but squishable, because it's just hair. You're not going to be compressing it so tight that it's like wood. But that's like how, what crochet does. And some people say there is a correct way to crochet that doesn't do any harm. I don't believe that. I think, if you do it once, and if you do it only on the roots, where there is room, you might be able to limit the harm. If you do it in a silent room so you can hear the hairs breaking, you're not going to break as many. But a lot of people are convinced that the proper way to do it is actually the worst way to do it, and that's when you're sitting there stab, 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 stab. I do not think that there really is any way to do it without any real harm. Now, one thing I've seen, we had one member join our site who crocheted his dreads pretty regularly, I think like weekly, for I don't remember, maybe a couple years. He dove into a pool. It was a high dive, maybe 15-foot high dive. He dove into the pool. The impact of the water took off 4 dreads. Now, if you're thinking, a dread should support several hundred pounds, that's like 20 pounds of water pressure. Took a dread off, 4 dreads off. That's a lot of damage to cause that much weakness. Now, when you think of like strength in a dread, the reason that like hemp fiber is so much stronger than like cotton, hemp has long fibers that are continuous. Cotton has short fibers that are continuous. So when you're taking a cotton rope, it's got short fibers that are, all woven together. That's not going to have as much strength as something made out of, all continuous fibers. That's why hemp is, stronger than steel. Now that's why a dread that's like healthy is going to be able to support hundreds and hundreds of pounds of weight. But then like a crochet dread that's, had every hair in it broken into little pieces is going to be very weak. Now, the same thing goes for like dread tools, like loose hair tools. I mean, that thing looks like a harpoon. It's so thick. That's going to do its extreme destruction when you're trying to fix loose hairs, but you're creating more loose hairs by fixing them. And you're doing extreme damage to it. And then the lock doctor, the Dreadhead headquarters lock doctor, I can't believe they sell this thing to fix dreads. All it does is complete destruction. I mean, it's the most destructive thing you could possibly do to dreads. First of all, let me explain what that thing is for. Like when you're dreading, you're going to get, I've been laying my hair Congo a lot, so I got a lot of ones that are combining, but Let me find one that's got some loops here. I got a bunch of babies here. I'll find one of those. But you get little zigzags and stuff in your dreads that are, especially early on, that are signs that they are dreading. So it's nothing to worry about, but Dreadhead Headquarters likes to make you think, you know, that everything that is normal is a problem that you need to fix. That way they can sell you more tools, more products to fix normal things like loose hair, which is normal, like zigzags and loops and stuff, which is normal. You know, they'll just sell you more and more crap to fix normal things. So if you get a little loop in a dread, they'll tell you to take this tool and sit there and stab and stab and stab. This tool is a felting needle. Now, have you ever seen felt? Have you ever taken a felt and just pulled it apart with your fingers? That is what this tool does to your dread. It takes long continuous fibers and shreds them up into tiny, tiny pieces so that your dread is not a dread anymore, it's felt. And felt is so weak that, like, you know, it'll fall off just from its own weight. The lock doctor, on the instructions, it says, you know, poke with care, you know, because if you poke too much, your dread can fall off. But don't worry, you can reattach it with the same tool. So he's like, his whole philosophy is, if you fuck it up with the tool, you can fix it with the tool by fucking it up even more. Now, I mean, I really do not think that's a very ethical way to tell people to fix their dreads. But nothing that Dreadhead Headquarters recommends ever makes any sense. I mean, you know, they tell you to leave rubber bands in your hair for months, you know, which is a stupid, stupid idea. They tell you to put wax in your dreads, you know, to make your dreads rot on the inside, and, you know, so you can never get them clean. You know, they're just one of the most destructive companies there is. But I'm getting off the track. I just want to talk about interlocking and crocheting. You know, which are, you know, both epidemics. Like interlocking, years ago it was called root flipping. Until root flipping, it got a bad name because it was causing so many dreads to fall off, and it became common knowledge that root flipping made your dreads fall off. So locticians and salons, they decided to change the name and start calling it interlocking. You know, and then now it's starting to get to be known that interlocking causes dreads to fall off. So what are they doing? They're changing the name again. They're starting to call it looping. They're calling it locking. They're calling it rooting. A lot of different other things. Now, one thing about roots is that they never need a thing done to them. When you separate dread, which I haven't separated mine in 3 years, so I have right now, right here, you see a few hairs connecting this one and this one. So you rip them like that, and they're no longer connected. See how easy that was? I mean, I haven't separated in 3 years. I mean, these are connected. They're not going to come apart. They've been together for years. But that's my choice to let them grow together because I wanted them to get thicker. But if you don't want them to grow together, you just separate them. And when you separate them, you're going to get some loose hairs. And like, I mean, see loose hairs like this here. Now, I've been conditioning mine a lot, so I have quite a bit of these loose hairs, but I had a little sea salt to my wash lately, and they started to dread, so I have dozens and dozens of these tiny little baby dreads forming all over, which can't find any. No, I can't find any right now because I got two. Oh wait, here's one right here, which is already combined, and it's already two combined to show you. See, that's what happens when you don't rip for 3 years. But the roots, like when you get all these loose hairs around them, that's healthy because it protects your scalp, so you're not going to be getting sunburn and skin cancer on your scalp. but it will give you a constant garden of like new dreads that are going to be popping up all the time. So you're going to have like a thick, I mean I have, let me show you. And, oh, caught on stuff. I got, a hell of a lot of dreads that are just like, I have a whole thick head of dreads, that are just going to be constantly having new dreads pop up. So like this one right here. That's going to give you a full head of dreads, so you're not going to have like that look where you have, a few little tiny skinny dreads surrounded by big areas of bald scalp, which is, like that whole manicured look that salons are telling you that are what you want. And to me it looks like a diseased look. It looks like you're going bald or, have cancer or something when you have more scalp showing than actual dreads. Now, like, if you want, you can let all those loose hairs join into other dreads so that, they're getting thicker and stronger and everything. A lot of African people will twist their dreads to suck those hairs in, and if you do that, some not very tightly, I mean, the way the salons do it, it's a stupid idea. I've actually seen them get twisted right off. But if you keep doing that, you're going to be constantly weakening your dreads. It also still makes them, real thin, real tight, and you get all that sucked in look with all the hair like being sucked into a too thin dread. But if you do it lightly and everything, it will pull in some of the hair and make, get rid of some of that loose hair around the scalp. Or you can just leave it go and it'll take care of itself. You don't really have to ever do anything to the roots. That's another thing about salons is they'll tell you you have to come in every 2 weeks or every month and get retightening and root maintenance and all kinds of crap. It's all unnecessary. I mean, when you start dreading, they'll be a little loose and they will tighten up over time on their own. You don't need retightens. In fact, it's probably, a really bad idea to do it, and you definitely don't need root maintenance because your roots are the strength of your dreads. If the roots are weak, the dreads are going to fall off. So, I mean, like all this root rubbing that people do, all the crocheting the roots, threading the roots, the interlocking, all that stuff, is counterproductive. It's only going to be doing harm to your dreads. Anyways, that's about it for now. I'm going to, include some pictures of, some of the damage that interlocking and crochet can do to your dreads and everything like that. But I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll be posting more soon.